Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to some of you. This is a global presentation. I'm Rick Polito. I'm editor-in-chief of the Nutrition Business Journal, and we're going to talk about, what NBJ sees of the global markets. I'm going to be here with John Benninger, who's, we'll just say, a veteran of the industry with supply side since the beginning, I believe. John, welcome aboard.
Thanks. Great to be here. A lot to talk about today.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I said you've been here a long, seen a lot of things over the years. I've been with MBJ for 12 years. Have you ever seen a level of international, we'll say, disarray across all markets, but especially the supplement industry since you've been here?
No, I mean, there's a lot going on, and you're right. A lot has. There have been times in the past where there's been a lot going on. If I think back through all those last few decades, we had that pandemic not too long ago that was a lot to deal with, obviously, and other trials before that, economic or international trade, that sort of thing. But yeah, it feels like right now there's a lot going on that people are trying to figure out and a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, and it's changing so quickly. That's the big piece of it. Obviously, the pandemic was a sudden arrival, but to some extent, we kind of knew what we were dealing with, and it started to roll out in a as viruses can be a very coherent fashion, but sort of the lurching from direction to direction. And we're talking about tariffs, of course, but there's going to be effects coming from those tariffs that we'll speak about in a minute. Um, that's a lot to deal with. Sudden changes. We talked before we got on about having a crystal ball, and I'm thinking, hell, a crystal ball that went ahead 48 hours would probably be useful right now.
Yeah, things are changing so much. It's tough to know exactly what's happening right now in any given moment, but that's where it's so important to be paying attention. There are a lot of great resources out there. Obviously, Nutrition Business Journal is one of them, and there are many others that we'll touch on as well. It's a great time to constantly be in seek to understand mode and listening and gathering information from as many reliable sources as possible to just get the best sense you can of what's going on today and what might go on tomorrow. And then, what do we do about that? How do we run our businesses and make the best decisions we can? We're not always going to get it right, but what's the best decision we can make today?
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about having your ear to ground, having an ear to a lot of different stretches of ground, and that's what we do at MBJ is part of what we bring to the market. The intelligence, as you said, is brought from many sources. And there's a lot of people talking about the situation right now, particularly tariffs. You and I were at the Council for Responsible Nutrition retreat last week. You've been over at the American Herbal Products Association. Um, what I see in here is there's this concern for the industry that, like all industries, are dealing with the tariff sort of upheaval and what that
Hmm.
means for economies around the globe. But the supplement industry is caught in this middle space where we're bringing ingredients in from countries and then trying to sell ingredients back into those countries. And you've got a tariff coming one way, and in some ways, a tit for tat reciprocal tariff going back into that country. How how high is the anxiety at places like, CRN was a big topic. What are you
Yeah.
hearing around?
Yeah, everywhere I go, whether it's at one of these association conferences, which both of them were fantastic. They were great opportunities to learn and get different opinions about what's going on. But yeah, anxiety is there a bit. It's just uncertainty. It's really hard as leaders of these businesses, whether you're leading an ingredient company or a brand or a contract manufacturer or any of the many other service providers that make a part of our industry fabric here. It's hard to know what to do and what to expect. And with uncertainty, sometimes people just pause. They say, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything today. And that's a risk also. We saw that during COVID. We've seen it happens when you have upheaval and rapid change like this, the tendency to pause and to wait and hope that there will be more clarity. And that's okay. But if it lasts a long time, it can really we can't pause forever. We have to continue with our plans, product development, and growing our businesses. But it's tough to do in a world like this right now where there's so much uncertainty. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, sometimes we could call it impulsive, or arbitrary, these tariffs, but certainly it's lurching one direction or another. 100% on China as of last week. Now I should, make the disclaimer, neither John or I are experts on tariffs. And there is some sort of level of complexity and, piece by piece, ingredient by ingredient, things that are going on. Section 301, Section 310 out of China, and then, what are you selling into India? What are you bringing out of India? So we're not going to be able to talk in a lot of detail or really any detail about that, but we can talk about sort of what the implications are. So I think everybody's tuned in for numbers, so we're gonna go through some of those, and I want to talk region by region with John about some of the things I'm thinking or I'm hearing. So let's start with a big number. Let me see if I can get this to work. Here's the global supplement industry right now, how it's split up. As you can see, a lot of it is the United States, and we have a giant part from China as well. If you put those two together, it's most of the market, not a lot more than most of the market, but a big chunk of it. And what it tells me is it's not what we don't expect. I mean, the United States being where it is, being the size of the economy, China having the size of the economy and the size of the population, of course, that's going to be there. And of course, we're going to see growth a little slower than we would see in these smaller regions. Mike, the smaller regions are so important. And as I said before, these are sales going in or sales to consumers. There's a whole, supply element of that too, and that's where John comes in. And if you look at these big economies and these big consumption rates, how do you think that's reflected in the supply picture and how that might be buffeted by all this?
Yeah, I mean, we're in a market that, like many, that has a global supply network, not even the supply chain. Where business flows back and forth in very complex networks all over the world, and so the challenges that we're seeing right now make that even more complex. I think that something that I have to remind myself of, because it's easy to get frustrated or get anxious in times like this. What I have to remember is that we also have a lot of really positive tailwinds helping us, and that a lot of that is driven by the consumers around the world who want these products. They want healthier products for themselves and their families. They want natural products. They want products based on science, and that's great for our industry. That's something that is a real tailwind. As we're facing some of these challenges and some of these headwinds, I have to remind myself that when we get to talking about growth, we're in a market. We serve a market and a consumer base that wants what we have.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that in a second where we look into the category by category. But I want to point out as we go into those places to keep an eye on, and we'll talk about this in a minute, are Latin America doing really well, the Middle East doing really well. Um, Interesting to see how Eastern Europe and Russia are holding up, and also Western Europe, the way it's matching to some degree, the growth we're seeing here with similar dynamics. But also there's like I said, there's no crystal ball here. So we're looking to see what the economy is going to do. Economy is such a driver of these things. And we're looking to see where that goes as global growth is, starting to slow down. And that's part of this tariff picture. But, there's so many sidetracks for us to get on. So let's pop into some numbers. Here's the global supplement industry sales and growth as we see it from 2020 to 28. Now, when I think about this number and that, especially that, not this number, but that yellow line there, it's going to match a lot of what we're seeing in the United States, down to some of the actual percentages of growth. With that big spike and the pandemic, that drop afterwards is sort of a correction as we thought of it. But still, we don't have the numbers here, but it's a bigger industry than we thought it was going to be. What a momentous few years. I think of all the domestic squabbles and all the rest, but there's some, big changes going on out there. But again, I mean, what you were talking about before, John, was the level of interest in all these different products, and especially as middle class emerges, the things I said about Latin America, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but also the Middle East, it's about product taste and going on beyond vitamins and minerals. So let's keep moving through, and I want to come back to sort of that and what the role that product development from the United States has, and the role and the way that product development could be crimped by tariffs. So if we look at this global herbs and botanicals sales, Again, following that line after the pandemic, coming back and that, fairly modest growth. This is across some really big numbers, obviously, and the United States having such a pull on that. And we're not going to have that pandemic growth again, I hope. I have to hate to say, but we're looking at industry, global herbs and botanical sales, pushing up above 56 billion. The entire market for supplements in the United States is around 70 right now. So we can see this is huge. There's so many different cultures. There's places where this has so much sway. And I think there's an add-on above vitamins and minerals. And, herbs and botanicals can be that because there's so much innovation there. What are you hearing about from the suppliers on how they're meeting this demand and how, product development is playing out?
Yeah, well, that's just it. There's so many herbs. The plant kingdom is amazing, and so, uh, like in a couple of weeks, we'll be at supply side. A lot of us will be there, and we're going to see all kinds of new product introductions and product innovations and things like that. And so you have consumers, shoppers, people that are interested in a more natural approach to health. We have industry, particularly at this level of the ingredient companies, making massive investments in research and science and better ways to do those studies also. And so those two things combined, consumers who want these options and types of products, and industry investing in delivering science backed products, those are great things. So tariffs, no tariffs, trade wars, no trade wars, those things don't change, I don't think. Consumers are going to continue to want these products and more information about them. And industry, I hope, will continue to invest in research and development and bringing more products to market. You look at some of the success we've seen, like from the Ayurveda world of Ayurveda, right? In India, in particular, and ingredients that have come into the U.S. market and Europe and other global markets, just scratching the surface there. There's so many other botanicals and ingredients that haven't reached that global market yet, and that's true in all directions. Whether we're talking about traditional medicines or ingredients coming from China and throughout Asia, or South America, or developed here in the United States. So I'm optimistic. It's easy to get down with some of the challenges going on economically in right now, but I'm optimistic about this industry because, like I said, we have products that people want. We have products that science supports, and I think that carries the day.
Absolutely. Well, let's keep moving here. Now, here's a category we throw a lot together. The global numbers are complex, the markets are complex, our intelligence is, reaching into those markets is difficult. So we combine a lot in our report into this one sort of super category with, sports nutrition, meal replacements, homeopathy, and specialty ingredients. Now, specialty, in case you don't know, includes things like probiotics and omega-3s. So here we see the market, was less affected by the pandemic and settling into that sort of 6% range. But there's a lot, and especially in some of these smaller markets, there's a lot of opportunity here around, I'd say, sports nutrition and some meal replacement. And it's again about sort of middle classes coming online. And we're going to drop in briefly without the charts, I'm sorry, about some of the numbers country by country. But my take is that in places like India, where strong growth, in places like Latin America, same thing, or the Middle East, a lot of that's driven by this, pool of innovation that can happen in there, and particularly in sports nutrition.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the growth at the country level, I think that the number that you shared with me, for instance, in India, is that the market growth in 2024 was over 8%. That's pretty impressive. And then in the Middle East, looking at herbs and botanicals, nearly 16%, 15.7% growth in the herbs and botanicals market in Middle East in 2024. And so, yeah, what's causing that? Well, people, as economies grow and people have the ability to purchase more products and learn about these products, they want them. We all want the same thing. We want to live longer, healthier, better lives. And we want that for our families and our communities. And that's what our industry is about. So again, why I'm optimistic even in the face of challenges.
Okay, but when we go, here we'll pop back. We're sort of popping around in, different directions here, but the global vitamins and minerals, we have to pull that across. That's never going to grow like we do see the innovation this rest. Vitamins and minerals, fairly basic or perceived as fairly basic. The need is great, but the excitement's not always there. But we have obviously a pandemic effect there back in 2020, but settling into this 4% growth. But still, it's the biggest piece of the global overall um, market. And we expect it to continue in a fashion just like that. And I want to make sure I'm not out of slides here. Oh, I am. We'll keep that on global vitamins, minerals, as it is the biggest. But I wanted to talk, you brought up India. Now, I have to go over to other notes I have here.
Uh-huh.
And I don't want to be, hopefully I'm not sharing that screen. Um, that's 8%. Now, India is much smaller market than China, but the growth there is huge, and the growth for sort of adoption of supplements and beyond just the herbs and botanicals, which is so big to Ayurveda. In the next couple of years, they'll be fairly equal. That sports nutrition, homeopathy, meal replacement, specialty thing will be about almost even with herbs and botanicals in a place where Ayurveda is so central to how people perceive health. Um, how is, how is our US producers going to fare in that? Do you think we lead on that sort of mixed category, especially sports nutrition and the perception of
Yeah, I
US?
mean, there's a huge opportunity there, and a lot of U.S. brands are already taking advantage of that rapidly growing market in India. It's just going to continue to grow, so there's big opportunity there. If brands are not already in that market or looking at that market, they probably should at least consider it. It's a great opportunity. That said, in the environment that we're in right now, you're seeing more and more of the made in fill in the blank efforts, whether that's made in India, made in Canada, made in whatever. I think that's to be expected with whether we want to call it a trade war or the tariffs or whatever it is. It's causing companies to think about their sourcing and their supply networks and how they bring products to market. So there's a real opportunity in India for companies to make Indian products. That doesn't mean that that excludes U.S. brands from getting into that market. Our trade shows over there continue to grow. We have some ingredient events over in that market. There's a lot of excitement over there. Certainly, a couple of regulatory challenges related to dietary supplements. There's some efforts over there to think about how supplements should be regulated, but that's an ongoing thing globally. That's been going on for decades. Are supplements foods? Are supplements drugs? Are they something in the middle? And that's where, again, being active in the industry through our trade associations globally is really important. That's why we're active with all of those to protect this important market that we've created. Um, if you're not doing business in India, probably worth taking a look at it.
Absolutely. And I think there's some regulatory changes there that are important to understand. For our NBJ global issue, not this global report that we're talking about now, we've gone to a format that's a lot of guest pieces. And I would encourage anybody to pick that up. And it's still available on the NBJ store. Came out a couple months ago. And one of the things in there was about the regulatory change. They're shifting sort of who governs it. And again, I'm not an expert and I don't have the story in front of me right now. But there's
Hmm.
also a piece there of the sort of the economic development the Indian government sees in the supplement industry. They're talking about 100 billion or $100 billion industry between production and consumption, ingredients going out, what's being made there within the next, I think, 10 or 15 years. At any rate, while they do that at the same time as this tariff thing is happening, it's particularly punitive on all Indian goods, 50%. So that means the ingredients that are coming out of India is 50%. And then we imagine we've been hearing that there's a backlash there for consumers. And then again, the tit for tat part of tariffs is a big deal. So what the country that's trying to build its supplement industry and connections with other countries might be looking at somewhere like Australia. There's a huge opportunity for that made in to be not the United States. I wonder, once you lose that shelf space, how easy is it to get it back at the consumer level?
Yeah, it's tough at the consumer level and just throughout the supply chain. We're seeing that in agriculture right now. You know, when we look at the effects on farming and farmers in the U.S. and more commodity products, so it's definitely a risk, and it can be scary. You know, once we lose that market, can we recapture it or get it back? You know, it's hard to predict what's going to happen there. I would
Yeah.
come back to this though, that the market in India, there's a lot of demand. It's a great market to participate in. And then on the ingredients coming from India during the APA conference in Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago, that was one of the sessions that was there. A lot of great information, and all the trade associations are very active, and we'll get into hopefully a little bit of what's going on. But with American Herbal Products Association, for example, they're really focusing on identifying what are those ingredients, herbs in particular, but ingredients coming from India that cannot be sourced in the United States, and then working to build a comprehensive list of those and work with the administration to get exceptions to the tariff. So there's a lot of activity right now, led mainly by our trade associations to try and help mitigate some of these challenges for our companies.
Yeah, and there's such a moving target, as we heard talked about at the CRN retreat last week. And when we talk about ingredients coming out and products going back in, I mean, you know, the 500-pound gorilla in there is China. Some people have measured that 80% of ingredients come from there, and we have a 100% tariff as of last Friday. I was looking back at our global issue, and in July, we're talking about combined tariffs on certain categories are around 60%. Now it's 100%. Now it's this and that. Um, and supposedly it's being negotiated, but we don't know where it's going. It's hard to overstate what a big deal China is for this. And we do every supplement trade association is working really hard on it. But what do you expect to hear people talking about at supply side, both in terms of bringing ingredients in and then selling back in to those
Yeah,
countries?
this is going to be obviously a hot topic at the show. Everybody's talking about it. We have several sessions there for people. One called Supply Chain Challenges, Finding Consistency Through Tariffs, AI, Diversification and Politics. Our colleague Hank Schultz, who many of you know, one of our great journalists, he's going to be moderating that session. And we have another one for specifically for the food and beverage supply chain, which overlaps with dietary supplements. And with that one, we'll have Matt Landy from the Organic Trade Association and Rend Almondary and others, moderated by our editor, Scott Miller. And then finally, a third session on Trump tariffs and turmoil. And that one will have Graham Rigby, the president from American Herbal Products Association, Lauren Israelson from UNPA, Duffy Mackay from CHPA, Stephen Shapiro from Rivkin Radler, and Katie Bond from Keller and Heckman. And that's going to be moderated by our own Sandy Almendarez. So those are just three of the scheduled sessions where we'll be talking about this. But it'll be a conversation that's going on throughout the show between exhibitors, attendees, all of us. And it's a great place to learn from others. You know, we should all be sharing information with each other and listening to each other right now.
God, that last session sounds like an all-star cast. Sandy gonna have a whip and a chair, keep this
That would
going.
be great. You know, that's one thing I love about our associations, and when big issues like this arrive, whether it's a regulatory threat or something with Congress, or in this case the situation with tariffs, they pull together and really do a lot of great work together, and they've created a lot of great resources. So you know, we're members of each of the associations, and I would encourage everyone to be members of at least one, but hopefully more than one. It's still my sense that not enough companies, whether they're on the ingredient part of the business, the brand part of the business, the contract manufacturing part, not enough are members of our trade associations yet. And so I would encourage those who aren't just to join. Right now is an important time. For instance, the American Herbal Products Association for members, if you're a member, behind the login, they have an entire herbal tariff, or excuse me, an entire tariff toolkit. and it has timely updates. It has the tariff codes, Annex 2 and Annex 3 lists, a user guide to the harmonized tariff schedule, all kinds of tools that are available to APA members. Um, but only if you're a member. Same thing, CHPA, Consumer Healthcare Products Association, has a tariff tracker page that has tariff rates, executive orders, fact sheets, all kinds of tools. Um, CRN, NPA, UNPA, each of the associations is offering unique insight and information and tools. So now is when people say, "Wow, why should I spend all that money to be a member of one or more of these trade associations?" Well, right now is the reason why, because those companies who have access to this information and these tools are going to have a big advantage over those who don't.
Yeah, they're way smarter about these things than you or I, John. That's
Yeah, that's
certainly
why we
true.
rely on them at our events to be the speakers and for our issues like this report to contribute the content.
Okay, and that's also a reason to subscribe to NBJ. Our global report has this 8 chapters, I believe. We got the United States and Canada, Mexico and Latin America. We got Australia, New Zealand, which we haven't even brought up here. Japan, the rest of Asia, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, India and China. Um, it's one of the hardest reports we do, and we depend on the community that's out there to keep this conversation going for us. As I said, our issue is all about primarily guest pieces and bringing in that expertise and going to the trade shows, going to supply side, attending CRN, having you at APA, all these places is how we get our best information. Is there a what is the best way for us to hear from them? I mean, we're doing guest pieces. Is it I want to be pulled aside at supply side. What about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I go to all these events and I'm on the road so much is because of just that. Having conversations with people. One of our core values here at the company is seek to understand. This is a really important time to seek to understand and get a lot of different input from a lot of different sources. And we're one of them. Obviously, we have a lot of journalists like you and Hank and Sandy and Scott and others that try to cover this. The trade associations are great. The other media in the industry, that's a great place. And at supply side, we're all going to be there talking about these things. The last thing I'd love to just throw in, I know we're getting close to time. Um, when we think about what should we be doing as companies and as an industry right now, another important one for me is really paying attention to the quality. Whenever we see something that causes turbulence in supply chains, whatever that is. Right now, we're talking about tariffs and trade wars. It could be weather. It could be anything. We see a big uptick in adulteration and fraud. And I don't think this is going to be any different, as we see impacts on prices for goods in our supply chains. That's when people try to rip off the system. And so things like the Botanical Adulterants Prevention Program from the American Botanical Council efforts in the industry are really important right now. So, especially for brands that maybe don't have deep relationships with their supply chains, that's the most important thing is to have actual relationships with your suppliers and not just transactional. But for everyone, be looking for that. As the prices go up, as the impact of tariff hits, you're going to see an uptick in adulteration and people trying to game the system, and you don't want to fall victim to that.
Absolutely. I think it's the supply chain changes. There's also going to be like the manufacturing. And the United States has always stood for quality, and other countries are coming in to fill the gaps. It's this sort of tit for tat, reciprocal tariffs start to kick in, and sort of resentment against the United States. And I'm hearing about U.S. brands moving some of their manufacture overseas. So the quality picture gets a little more complicated in there. I still have faith in the big U.S. brands that have the capacity to do that. But there's a lot going on. I mean, my closing thoughts are going to be keep an eye on those places where, the middle class is emerging. And in India, the middle class there will be bigger than the entire population in the United States fairly soon. Look at where the big growth is in Latin America. Look what the growth in Middle East. Um, Look how sort of flattening it out is not flat, but sort of modest and matched between the United States and Europe most years. And then my other closing thoughts are keep that innovation going, no matter how much you want to sort of quiet things down as we, deal with this, being buffeted by change. Innovation is super important, and that's where the United States leads the world. Then my last thing to say is the slides are going to be available after this call, and we want to hear from you. As I just said, we need to keep this conversation going. The only way we become more of experts on these tariffs, about these dynamics in different countries, is to hear from you. And thank you all for showing up. Look for this report. It's thick. It's got it region by region and category by category. So we hope to see you at our next LinkedIn Live. Thank you so much for attending.